I've always prided myself on being level-headed, especially when it comes to money. At 55, I've weathered 2 recessions, built a successful interior design business from scratch, and managed to maintain my sanity while raising 2 children who are now successful adults. My silver hair, which I stopped dyeing 5 years ago, has become something of a personal trademark in Boston's design circles. Diana Lawson's eye for color is as striking as her silver mane, one client wrote in a testimonial that still makes me smile. So when Mark proposed to me after 3 years of dating, it seemed like the sensible next chapter for both of us. At 58, he was divorced but without children, ran a small but promising tech startup focused on sustainable energy solutions, and possessed the kind of quiet intelligence that had attracted me from our first meeting at a charity auction. We were both too practical for grand romantic gestures, or so I thought. "Let's do something crazy," he had said 6 months ago, eyes twinkling as we shared a bottle of wine on my back porch. "Let's get married in New Zealand. Just us, the mountains, and a justice of the peace," I'd laughed at first. "New Zealand, that's halfway around the world." "Exactly," he'd replied, taking my hand. "Diana, we've both done the traditional thing before. Let's make this one an adventure." The idea took root. We set up a joint account specifically for our honeymoon fund and committed to transferring $500 each month. With our savings and the extra contributions, we'd have enough for 2 weeks in New Zealand by our wedding date in October. It was the most spontaneous thing I'd done in years, and it felt exhilarating. Until today. I'm sitting in the Boston Logan International Airport lounge, staring at my phone in disbelief. Mark and I were supposed to be flying to Chicago for a weekend with his college friends, a mini bachelor party, he'd called it, though at our age that meant good restaurants and maybe a jazz club rather than anything rowdy. But Mark never showed up at the airport. His text had come 20 minutes after our scheduled meeting time. Something urgent came up with the company. "Can't make Chicago, so sorry. We'll explain everything tonight." I'd already checked in, already gone through security. The lounge access was part of the travel package we'd booked, so I decided to at least enjoy a complimentary glass of wine before figuring out my next move. That's when I decided to check our honeymoon fund, a habit I'd developed over the months, taking pleasure in watching it grow. The balance read $1,243.52. Last week it had been $14,876.29. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the transaction history. 3 days ago, $13,500 had been transferred to an account I didn't recognize, Mark's personal account. I called him immediately, straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Why is there only $1,200 left in our honeymoon fund?" No response. The airport lounge suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. I couldn't process what was happening. Mark had always been so responsible, so transparent about money. We'd even joked about how boring and middle-aged we were, reviewing our budgets together over Sunday coffee. "Ms. Lawson, would you like another glass of Chardonnay?" The lounge attendant's voice snapped me back to reality. "No, thank you," I managed to say. "Actually, I need to cancel my flight to Chicago." An hour later, I was in a rideshare heading back to my townhouse in Cambridge, my mind racing. Was Mark in trouble? Was this some kind of midlife crisis? Or had I completely misjudged the man I was planning to marry? I tried calling Mark again. Nothing. I called his assistant at Ecotech Solutions, the startup he'd founded 5 years ago. "Hi Jessica, it's Diana. Is Mark in the office today? I've been trying to reach him." A pause. He's been in meetings all day with the investors. It's been pretty intense around here." Investors. The word stuck in my mind as I thanked her and hung up. Mark had been trying to secure a second round of funding for months. His company had a promising prototype for a more efficient solar panel, but needed capital to scale production. By the time I got home, a new text from Mark had arrived. "Tied up in meetings. We'll come over tonight and explain everything. I promise it's not what you think. Love you, but I couldn't wait." I spent the next several hours doing something I'd never done before, researching everything I could about Ecotech Solutions. I knew the basics. Mark had founded it after 20 years in corporate energy, had a team of 12 employees, and had secured initial funding of $2 million 2 years ago. Their proprietary technology promised to increase solar panel efficiency by 22%, while reducing production costs. What I didn't know until my deep dive into business databases and tech industry news was that Ecotech was on the verge of either a breakthrough or bankruptcy. They needed at least $1 million in new investment to continue operations beyond the next quarter. Mark had been courting investors aggressively, but with little success. And then it clicked, the missing $13,500. It wasn't a lot in the grand scheme of a tech startup's finances, but it might be enough to keep things afloat until a major investor came through. Mark had taken our honeymoon money to prop up his struggling company. I should have been furious. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me, followed by a clarity of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. If Mark's company was in trouble, why hadn't he just told me? Did he think I wouldn't understand, wouldn't help? By the time the doorbell rang at 7:30 p.m., I had made a decision that surprised even me. Mark looked exhausted when I opened the door, his normally neatly combed grey hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. "Diana, I can explain everything," he started, his voice strained. I held up my hand. "The honeymoon fund. You took $13,500 3 days ago." He slumped onto my couch, running his hands through his hair. "Yes, I did. The company is in trouble, Diana. We've been developing this new prototype, and we're so close to a breakthrough, but our main investor pulled out last week, said the market was too volatile. We needed bridge funding to keep the lab running just until the new round comes through." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "I was going to put it back, with interest, before the wedding." "Why didn't you just ask me? I would have helped." "Because I was embarrassed," he exclaimed, standing up again and pacing my living room. "You're so together, so successful. I didn't want you to see me failing. I didn't want you to think you were marrying a failure." I looked at this man, this proud, stubborn man whom I loved, and made my decision. "I want to invest in Ecotech," I said calmly. Mark stopped pacing. "What? Not as your fiancé, as an investor. I want to buy a stake in your company." He stared at me in disbelief. "Diana, you don't have to do this. I made a mistake taking that money, and I'll make it right." "This isn't about the honeymoon fund," I interrupted. "I've spent the afternoon researching your company. The technology is sound, your team is excellent, the market need is there. What you lack is adequate capitalization and perhaps some business development expertise." I smiled slightly. "Which, as it happens, I have." "You're serious," he said, more a statement than a question. "Completely. I have $200,000 in a diversified investment portfolio. I'm willing to move $50,000 into Ecotech in exchange for a 5% stake." Mark sat down heavily. "Diana, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. But understand this is business, not charity. I believe in you and your vision, but I also expect a return on my investment." I paused, then added, "And Mark, no more secrets. Not if we're going to be business partners. And definitely not if we're going to be married." He nodded slowly, and I could see the weight lifting from his shoulders. "No more secrets," he agreed. What I didn't tell him was that I had already contacted a lawyer specializing in startup investments. The paperwork would be ready tomorrow. I would become a minority stakeholder in Ecotech Solutions before the end of the week. And our honeymoon? Well, that would depend on whether we could turn the company around. It's amazing how quickly you can become immersed in a world you never expected to enter. 2 months after discovering Mark's financial deception, I found myself sitting in Ecotech's modest conference room, listening to their lead engineer explain the technical specifications of their next-generation solar panel design. "The key innovation is in the substrate material," Aisha Khan, a brilliant engineer with a PhD from MIT, was saying. "By incorporating this new polymer composite, we've increased light absorption while decreasing production costs by approximately 18%. I nodded, taking notes. While the technical details still occasionally went over my head, I'd spent the past weeks absorbing everything I could about solar technology, manufacturing processes, and the renewable energy market. My $50,000 investment had bought me a 5% stake in the company and a seat at the table. Mark sat at the head of the conference room, occasionally glancing my way with an expression I couldn't quite read, Was it gratitude, admiration, or perhaps discomfort at having his fiancée scrutinizing his business decisions? Our personal relationship had shifted into uncertain territory. We'd postponed the wedding indefinitely, my decision, which Mark had accepted with quiet resignation. The New Zealand honeymoon fund had been formally dissolved, with Mark insisting on adding an additional $1,500 interest payment to the $1,300 he returned to my personal account. The prototype testing is scheduled for next month, Mark was saying, bringing my attention back to the meeting. If the results match our projections, we can approach the venture capital firms with concrete data. And if they don't? I asked, the question slicing through the room's optimistic atmosphere. Mark's jaw tightened. Then we adjust and retest. After the meeting, Mark asked me to stay behind. When the last team member filed out, he closed the door and turned to me. You don't have to interrogate my team, Diana. I raised an eyebrow. I asked a legitimate business question, one that any investor would ask. He sighed, shoulders sagging slightly. I know, I'm sorry, it's just, this is strange for me. Having you here as an investor, not just as your fiancé, I supplied. Yes. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing but now recognized as a sign of his anxiety. Are we still that? Engaged? The question hung between us. I'd been avoiding this conversation, focusing instead on learning the business, on proving that my investment wasn't just an emotional reaction to his betrayal. I don't know, Mark, I answered honestly. I need time, and I need to see that you can be transparent with me, both in business and in our relationship. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. For what it's worth, having you involved in the company has been illuminating. You ask questions that never occurred to me. You see things from angles I miss. That was true. In just 2 months, I'd identified inefficiencies in their operational costs, suggested a restructuring of their marketing approach, and made connections with 2 potential clients through my interior design network, high-end developers interested in incorporating cutting-edge sustainable technology into luxury buildings. We should discuss the presentation for next week's investor meeting, I said, deliberately steering us back to business. The technical data is solid, but the market analysis needs work. Mark looked at me for a long moment, then smiled slightly. Always focused. That's why you're successful, Diana. That's why we'll both be successful, I corrected him. The next week proved pivotal. I'd taken a half day from my design business to attend Ecotech's presentation to Elevation Partners, a venture capital firm specializing in green technology. Mark was leading the technical portion, while I had insisted really, that I handle the market positioning and financial projections. The 4 partners from Elevation sat impassively as Mark walked them through the innovation, occasionally asking pointed questions about the technology's scalability and patent protection. When it was my turn, I felt a flutter of nerves. This was far from my usual client presentations about color schemes and space utilization. The renewable energy sector is projected to grow at 8.4% annually through 2030, I began, finding my rhythm as I moved through the slides I'd meticulously prepared. But the residential solar market faces specific barriers to adoption, cost, aesthetics, and integration challenges. Our technology addresses all 3. I outlined our 2-pronged market approach, licensing the technology to established manufacturers for immediate revenue, while developing our own premium product line for the high-end residential market, a sector I knew intimately through my design business. The affluent homeowner doesn't just want sustainable energy, they want sustainable energy that enhances their property's aesthetics and value, I explained, showing renderings of sleek, nearly invisible solar integration in luxury homes. They'll pay a premium for that combination, as I've seen firsthand, in my interior design practice. By the end of my presentation, the energy in the room had shifted. The partners were leaning forward, engaged. Their questions became less about risk mitigation and more about growth potential. In the lobby afterward, Mark squeezed my hand. That was brilliant, he whispered. Where did you get those renderings? I commissioned them, I admitted. From a 3D visualization artist I work with. I thought it was important to show them the vision, not just tell them about it. 2 days later, Elevation Partners offered a term sheet for $1.5 million in exchange for a 15% equity stake, valuing Ecotech at $10 million pre-money. It was more than Mark had hoped for, with better terms than he'd expected. The celebration at the office was jubilant. Champagne flowed, the team basking in the validation of their work and the security of knowing their jobs were safe for the foreseeable future. I stood somewhat apart, watching Mark accept congratulations, his face more relaxed than I'd seen it in months. Jessica, Mark's assistant, appeared at my side with a glass of champagne. "You know, before you came on board, we were all updating our resumes," she confided. "Mark was working 18-hour days, trying to keep everything afloat. None of us thought we'd make it." "He should have told me sooner," I said, more to myself than to her. Jessica smiled knowingly. Men and their pride, especially the good ones. Later that evening, Mark and I sat on the patio of an upscale restaurant, the summer air warm around us. He raised his glass. "To my brilliant partner, in business and, I hope, in life." I clinked my glass against his, studying his face. The stress, lines that had deepened around his eyes over the past months had softened. He looked more like the man I'd fallen in love with. "You know what I realized today?" I said. "When I found out you'd taken that money, I could have just walked away. Most people would have." "Why didn't you?" he asked quietly. I considered the question, because I saw something worth fighting for. Not just us, though that was part of it, but your vision. What you're trying to build matters. And I wanted to be part of it. He reached across the table, taking my hand. I almost lost everything that matters because I was too proud to ask for help. I won't make that mistake again. I squeezed his hand, feeling the first real thaw in the ice that had formed around my heart. Good, because partners, in business and in life, need to trust each other enough to be vulnerable. "Does this mean the engagement is back on?" He asked, a hopeful note in his voice. I smiled. "Let's say it's under active consideration by the board." He laughed, and I joined him, feeling lighter than I had in months. The future of the company, of our relationship, was still unwritten. But for the first time since that day in the airport lounge, I felt like we might find our way to a happy ending after all. Not in New Zealand, perhaps, but somewhere even. Better, right where we were, building something meaningful together. Fall in Boston brings a particular quality of light, golden and clear, illuminating the changing leaves with an almost theatrical radiance. I was appreciating this light streaming through the windows of Ecotech's new offices as I reviewed the quarterly financial reports. 6 months had passed since my unexpected entry into the world of renewable energy startups, and those months had transformed both the company and my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. "The production schedule looks good," I said to Mark, who was leaning against my desk reviewing the same reports. "If we stay on target, we'll have the first commercial units ready by February." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Aisha thinks we might even beat that timeline. The new manufacturing partner in Michigan has exceeded expectations." That had been my suggestion, moving production from overseas to a recently shuttered auto parts factory in Detroit. The cost was marginally higher, but the quality control was superior, the shipping logistics simpler, and the Made in America label added value for our target market. Plus, it had earned us favorable coverage in business publications. "Ecotech brings green jobs to Motor City. Have you reviewed the booth design for the Las Vegas Expo?" I asked, switching topics. The International Renewable Energy Expo was 3 weeks away, and it would be Ecotech's first major industry showcase since securing the Elevation Partners funding. "I have," Mark replied with a small smile. "Your team did an amazing job. It's elegant but approachable, exactly the brand positioning we wanted. I'd brought in my interior design firm to create Ecotech's exhibition space, blending high-end residential aesthetics with cutting-edge technology displays. The synergy between my established business and Mark's growing company had proven unexpectedly powerful. "Speaking of my team," I said, closing the financial report, "I should get back to the design studio. We have a client presentation at 3. Mark checked his watch. I'll walk you out. As we strolled through the office, a converted industrial space in Cambridge with exposed brick walls and abundant natural light, I noted with satisfaction how the environment had changed. Gone was the desperate energy of a company on the brink. In its place was focused productivity and cautious optimism. The team had grown to 20 people, the additional funding allowing Mark to hire key positions in engineering, sales, and operations. In the elevator, Mark took my hand. Dinner tonight? That new place on Newbury Street you've been wanting to try? I'd like that, I replied, giving his hand a squeeze. Our relationship had evolved along with the business. We were still engaged. I'd finally said yes to reactivating our plans 3 months ago, but we'd agreed to a longer timeline. Spring wedding, not fall. A smaller ceremony in Boston, not the New Zealand adventure we'd originally planned. And in truth, I didn't mind. The adventure we'd embarked on together proved more exhilarating than any honeymoon could have been. The restaurant that evening was everything I'd hoped. Innovative cuisine in an intimate setting with impeccable service. As we finished our main course, Mark reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. I have something for you, he said, sliding it across the table. I raised an eyebrow. This looks suspiciously like jewelry, Mr. Davidson, he smiled. Open it. Inside was not a piece of jewelry, but a small, perfectly crafted model of a solar panel, about the size of a postage stamp, fashioned into a lapel pin. The detail was extraordinary, the miniature version of our product rendered in sterling silver, and what appeared to be tiny blue sapphires representing the photovoltaic cells. It's beautiful, I said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. And very on brand. Turn it over, Mark instructed. Engraved on the back were the words, Diana Lawson, founding partner. The light that changed everything. I felt a lump form in my throat. Mark, I had it made for you to wear at the expo, he explained. Everyone should know that you're not just the CEO's fiancée. You're the reason Ecotech survived and thrived. I pinned it to my blouse, emotion making it difficult to speak for a moment. Thank you, this means a lot to me. There's more, he said, his expression growing serious. The board met yesterday while you were at your client site. I frowned slightly. The board consisted of Mark, myself, and 2 representatives from Elevation Partners. Was this scheduled? I didn't see it on the calendar. It was somewhat impromptu, Mark admitted. Richard and Ananya were in town for another meeting, and we took the opportunity to discuss something I've been considering for a while. My interior designer's instinct for reading people, honed through years of navigating clients' unspoken preferences and hesitations, sensed something significant coming. We voted unanimously to create a new position, Mark continued. Chief Marketing and Design Officer, with equity compensation that would increase your stake to 10%. I set down my wine glass, stunned. Mark, that's very generous, but I already have my design firm. I can't take on a full-time role at Ecotech. We know that, he said quickly. The position is structured as part-time, 15 hours a week, with flexibility to increase or decrease depending on your other commitments. But Diana, the work you're already doing for us, the market positioning, the design integration, the client relationships, it's been transformative. We want to formalize it, recognize it properly. I sat back considering. The truth was, I'd been spending nearly that much time on Ecotech matters anyway, often working evenings and weekends in addition to running my design business. And I'd enjoyed it immensely. The challenges were different, the scale larger, the impact potentially more significant. What about us? I asked quietly. Wouldn't this complicate things? Mark's expression softened. Life is complicated, Diana. Business is complicated. Relationships are complicated. We've navigated those complications pretty well so far, don't you think? I thought about the journey we'd taken since that day at the airport lounge. The broken trust, the rebuilding, the unexpected discoveries about ourselves and each other. We were stronger now, both individually and together. I'll consider it, I said finally, but I'll need to see the full proposal, understand the expectations and boundaries. Mark grinned. I expected nothing less. The full documentation is being prepared by legal. You'll have it by Monday. As we shared dessert, a decadent chocolate creation that the waiter had described in poetic detail, I reflected on the irony of my situation. 6 months ago, I'd been devastated to discover that Mark had drained our honeymoon fund, seeing it as a fundamental breach of trust. Now I was contemplating a deeper integration of our professional lives, a more complex intertwining of our futures. "What are you thinking about?" Mark asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "I'm thinking about that day at the airport," I admitted. "How sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best decisions." He nodded, understanding immediately. "I've thought about that too. What if I'd just asked you for help from the beginning? What if I'd been honest about the company's struggles?" "Then I would have helped you," I said simply. "But I wouldn't have become an investor. I wouldn't have discovered this whole new aspect of myself, this business strategist, who was apparently hiding inside an interior designer all along." "You were always more than just an interior designer," Mark said. "You're a visionary who understands both aesthetics and practicality. That's rare, and it's exactly what Ecotech needed." 3 weeks later, I stood beside Mark at the International Renewable Energy Expo in Las Vegas, wearing my silver solar panel pin and a tailored suit in my signature deep teal. Our booth, which had indeed turned out beautifully, was drawing significant attention, with a constant stream of industry professionals, potential clients and even competitors coming to see the technology that was generating buzz in renewable energy circles. I'd accepted the Chief Marketing and Design Officer position after negotiating terms that protected my independence and ensured I could maintain my design firm. My first official act had been to rename our flagship product line from the technically accurate but utterly forgettable ES500 series to Illumina. "It's not just about capturing light," I'd explained to the team. "It's about illuminating possibilities." As Mark demonstrated the Illumina panel to representatives from a major home builder, I noticed a woman watching intently from the periphery. She appeared to be in her 60s, stylishly dressed in a minimalist black ensemble that screamed New York executive. When she approached me, her handshake was firm, her assessment direct. "Impressive setup," she said, gesturing around the booth. "Different from the standard tech company display, more sophisticated." "Thank you," I replied. "We believe renewable energy technology can be both high-performing and aesthetically pleasing." She nodded approvingly. "I'm Eleanor Voss, VP of Sustainability Initiatives at Meridian Properties." I recognized the name immediately. Meridian was one of the largest luxury real estate developers on the East Coast, known for high-end properties, in Boston, New York, and Washington, D.C. "Diana Lawson," I introduced myself, Chief Marketing and Design Officer at Ecotech, and also the principal of Lawson Interior Design. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Lawson Interior Design? You did the Brenner residence in Back Bay last year." "Yes, that was one of our projects. Stunning work," she said appreciatively. "I toured it during a charity event. The integration of historical elements with contemporary functionality was masterful." "Thank you," I said, pleased by the recognition. "That balance is something we strive for at Ecotech as well, honoring traditional aesthetics while advancing technological innovation." Eleanor's interest visibly deepened. "We're developing a new concept for Meridian, luxury condominium buildings that are net zero energy consumers. The technology is the easy part. The challenge is creating spaces that our clients, who are paying 7 figures for their homes, find visually and experientially exceptional." "That's exactly the intersection where Ecotech is positioning itself," I said, excitement building as I recognized the potential opportunity. "Would you like to see some of our integration concepts?" I led her to a quieter corner of the booth, where we had created a mock-up of a residential window installation. As I explained the technology and design considerations, I could see her mentally applying the concepts to her own projects. By the end of our conversation, Eleanor had invited me to present to Meridian's executive team in New York the following month. If successful, it could mean a partnership worth millions, and a showcase for Ecotech's technology in some of the most prestigious properties on the East Coast. When she left, Mark appeared at my side. "Was that Eleanor Voss from Meridian?" he asked, clearly impressed. "It was," I confirmed, unable to keep the satisfaction from my voice, "and she's interested in exploring a partnership." Mark shook his head in wonder. You know, when I started Ecotech, I imagined changing the world through technology. I never considered that the key to that change might be as much about design and human experience as it was about engineering. The best innovations consider both, I replied. What good is revolutionary technology if people don't want it in their homes and lives? That evening, after a successful day at the expo, Mark and I escaped the sensory overload of the Las Vegas Strip for a quiet dinner at a small restaurant recommended by a local colleague. As we relaxed over wine and excellent food, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. "Do you regret it?" I asked Mark suddenly. "Taking that money from our honeymoon fund, not because of the consequences, but because of what it said about your trust in me, in us." He considered the question seriously, as I knew he would. One of the things I'd always valued about Mark was his thoughtfulness. "I regret the breach of trust," he said finally. "I regret hurting you and risking what we have, but I can't entirely regret the sequence of events it set in motion." He reached across the table, taking my hand. "You've transformed Ecotech, Diana, and you've transformed me, made me a better leader, a better partner." I squeezed his hand, acknowledging the truth in his words. "It's strange to think that if you hadn't made that desperate decision, if I hadn't checked our account balance while sitting in that airport lounge, none of this would have happened." "Do you regret it?" he asked, turning my question back to me. "Investing in the company? Postponing our wedding? Taking on this new role?" I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, successful in my field, content in my relationship, planning a conventional next chapter of marriage at 55. That life would have been good, comfortable. But this life, this unexpected detour into entrepreneurship, innovation, and renewed passion, this life was exhilarating. "No," I said, with certainty. "No regrets, though I do think we should reconsider the New Zealand honeymoon." I smiled. "After the spring launch of Illumina, of course." Mark laughed, raising his glass. "To no regrets, and to the airport lounge where everything changed." I clinked my glass against his. "To new beginnings that come disguised as endings, and to the discovery that sometimes at 55, life's most exciting chapters are still waiting to be written."